Are you busy today?
No, other than the closing this morning, just we responding to emails and people with COVID questions.
What, like, I'm curious, what's the typical stuff right now?
Um, some general stuff early on in the
Yeah,
transaction, and of course, near the end of the transaction, a lot of questions about how the closing is going to be conducted and when
all
can we
the
get the
stuff.
documents, all the
All,
stuff we're going to talk about.
that's great. That's great.
Yeah,
Cool.
and then some general nervousness, especially with sellers. What happens if my buyer loses their job? you know.
Yeah. And that's a good legit question. Is that something that's covered in that COVID thing, or that's really not a COVID rider issue, is it?
Well, the COVID writer actually is very inclusive. I just reread it.
Okay.
Um, I was curious by what it did cover, and it basically says that any any delay because of any buyer, seller, government entity, or third party transaction, you can delay the closing and you can cancel.
Okay.
So yeah, if a buyer loses their job, I mean, most likely going to be covered under the mortgage contingency
Right.
anyway.
Right. Right.
But and what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
Courts are closed. It's not as though you can turn around and sue somebody to try and force them to close. It's
Right.
just, and it happened. We had a deal that happened to a couple weeks ago, and we were a week before closing, but they've gotten a new contract at the same price. So I guess that one's going to work out, hopefully.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yep.
Okay, let's load up here, and I'll try and keep my eye on the time.
Sure.
Um,
I'm good with time, so whatever.
okay. Live on Facebook. Share it to your timeline. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to go here.
All right.
All right, here we go.
Good.
Ready?
We're good with the volume?
I'm good with volume, yeah.
Okay.
Um, go live. Hold on a second, add a title. Add a title. Paste. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I think we're good to go here.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Danny Glick. I'm here with Jonathan Aven. I'm Danny Glick with Ad Properties, real estate agent in Chicago, and I'm here with Jonathan Aven. Jonathan is an attorney practicing real estate law, and he's been doing it, can I say, for a quarter of a century.
As if this didn't make me look old already. Thank you.
Exactly. And Jonathan and I have been working closely together for about 20 years. So everybody, the goal that we want to accomplish today is really provide information to you for the nuances and new procedures and practices that are in play now that we are living in a coronavirus world. So I want to get into the meat of this because we want to try and keep this a short and sweet, but certainly full of info. So Jonathan, you and I have talked recently about the stages of the process legally, from writing an offer all the way through to closing. So let's start at the beginning. When someone's writing an offer, they should be aware now of this new rider that can go on any contract. It's called the COVID-19 rider.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about what that outlines and how it protects parties amidst our current environment.
Sure. The way it's written, it basically protects everyone involved in the transaction from any delay for any reason. It's really got everything in there. So buyer, seller, any government entity, any third party, inspector, lender, if the result of the pandemic creates any delays at any step for any person, it allows the parties to delay things in the course of the transaction, specifically the closing. And it also would allow for a party to cancel if they couldn't complete the transaction for whatever reason.
Okay, and so people know, this is just, it's a one-page rider. It goes on to the standard contract. Both parties sign it, and from that point, you're protected. It doesn't take a lot of legal work on your end necessarily.
No, it doesn't. And I'm seeing it with most contracts that are coming in, but almost every attorney I've seen has added some language to their letter, usually the buyer's attorney, similar to the rider. So even if it doesn't get done at the contract stage, it's getting done during attorney approval.
Okay, awesome. The next thing that we've spent a little bit of time talking about are signatures.
Yes.
Right? It used to be that, in general, the signature process in real estate has evolved even over the past, call it 2 to 3 years, with the advent of DocuSign, and it's now the case that a lot of signatures can be done electronically. But
Correct.
I'd like you to speak to, signatures that have changed, where it's now either the requirement of someone to get a signature notarized, the difference between getting a wet, we call it a wet or original signature, versus DocuSign. So what are you seeing, and how are things changing?
Sure. From the standpoint of the contract, like you said, that's not changing because that has already evolved, and DocuSign and other electronic signatures are being used. So we're not worried about that. What we're really thinking about now is in terms of the closing and closing documents, because sellers typically would get documents sent to them in advance. They would sign them and get them back to the attorneys for closing, which was fine. But usually they had to get it notarized. So the problem comes now in, if you can't leave your house, how do you get something notarized, right?
Right.
And in some cases, if you can't leave your house and you don't have a printer and a scanner, how do you go about doing all of that? So the biggest change is the governor issued an executive order which allowed for video notarization. So what it comes down to.
Okay.
All right. So as long as the notary and the person signing are both in the state of Illinois, and they have a video conference like this, if you had a document right there right now, you could sign it. I'm a notary. I would be able to notarize it, even though we're not sitting in the same room, and that would be valid. And that lasts as long as the current order is in effect. And so that's the new reality, is online notarization is something that is happening, and it's going to happen for a lot of people that just don't have access to get to a notary.
And so that takes it kind of to the next thing. So yeah. I sign a document, right? You're where you are, I'm where I am. I sign it, you see that it's me, and I'm signing the document, and now I have this document. What happens? We take it, we overnight it. What's changed in terms of filing and recording these documents?
Sure. So as far as getting it for the closing, if you're a seller and you're signing the deed, you would have to get that document back to me as the seller's attorney. And so you would overnight it. It's probably the easiest way. I go into my office once a week. I went in this morning very early, and there were 25 FedExes from people that have been sending me documents over the last week. Uh, that's the reality. That's what's happening. On the buyer side, and we'll get into this, talk about power of attorney, but same kind of thing. If you get something notarized, you're going to be sending it back to your lender attorney or the title company. They're going to need an original of some of these documents at some
Sure.
point before the closing.
Okay. So you touched on it, and I'm glad that's a good lead-in. Power of attorney.
Yes.
Maybe take a moment to talk about exactly what that means and how it has been used in the past. Are we seeing more of it? Are we seeing less of it? What are the pros? What are the cons?
Sure. Power of attorney is essentially a document where you are giving the authority for somebody else to do something for you. In terms of real estate, it's typically you're allowing somebody to sign documents for you. It's been around. We've used it on occasion. It's not used all the time, but there are times where somebody can't make it to a closing for a number of different reasons, and an attorney would go in and sign on their behalf. All right. So it's not unusual. Lenders do allow it for the most part. Nowadays, initially it became more common. When the executive order went into effect, initially I went and contacted all my clients and said, let's do power of attorney.
Sure.
So you don't have to come to the closing. I thought things were relatively safe. I would go to the closing, I would sign for them, and we thought that would have solved some of the problems. As it turns out, it was okay. It created a lot more work on my part.
Sure.
So, and then some of the lenders didn't allow it. So we are moving in a different direction with a lot of our closings. We could talk about that when we get to closings. The advantages to a power of attorney for a buyer is they don't have to come to the closing.
Easy, sure.
Yeah, they don't have to listen to what I have to say, which depending on who you are, may be a positive, maybe a negative.
Right.
The other negative to a power of attorney is you have to get it notarized. So we're back to that same old point. Now, I can notarize documents, but if I'm the power of attorney, I can also notarize that document. So that creates a challenge for some clients to find a notary that they can get to and get signed in time.
Okay.
The other thing is, if somebody is out of state, they're not traveling in state for the closing, they're not going to be able to get a power of attorney signed by an Illinois notary. They're going to have to find a notary in their state and hope that they have some kind of a remote notarization there as well.
Okay. So it sounds like it's an easy concept in theory, but in practice, there actually may be some additional hurdles that get presented.
Like everything else these days,
Right.
Things that used to be really easy, like running to the store, had just taken on a little bit more action required, a little more thought, and a little more planning. Yeah.
So let's talk about now closing.
Sure.
And closings. And we've had, you and I, we've had a number over the past few weeks, and I love the terms now. It's curbside closing, or I called my first one a dashboard closing, because literally my clients were, in their car, signing documents on the dashboard. But I'd like you to talk about what's evolved even since then, because every week this is changing.
Sure.
People are getting more creative. So we started with curbside and what I call sneaker net, where people were running documents in and out. What are you seeing, and what are some of the solutions, and what are some of the new things that title companies are initiating?
Sure. So early on, like I said, some of us were doing powers of attorney to avoid clients being there. And then clients started going to closings, but it was the curbside closing, which was literally, driving up, sitting there curbside, calling the closer, I'm here. And they would run out with the documents, wearing the mask and gloves. And here's a brand new pen. No one's ever seen this before. Sign with this and then throw it out when you're done. And they would sign the documents, call the closer back. Closer would come running back out, grab the documents, and finish the closing. Some of the title companies, especially the ones in the loop that are still operating, because they're, ones that office is still open, they have allowed buyers to come to the closing. So it's like closing, but just the buyer and the closer are there, and everyone has to maintain, social distancing. They're wiping everything down between closings. Nobody, people wearing gloves because nobody wants to touch the documents for fear of spreading anything. So that's still going on, although most of my clients are choosing curbside if possible. And then I just got an email today from a title company that stated they were trying to perfect kind of the stay-at-home closing, which would allow a buyer in the right circumstances sign from home. Because we already talked about the remote notarization. So stay home, sign the documents while you're on a video conference with the closer. And then presumably you'd have to get the documents overnighted back to the title company. But in the meantime, you would be able to do the closing without leaving your house. And, that's where I think things are probably going, especially since this is now another month at least that we're going to be dealing with this. And my guess is probably even things come back to normal, I think there's gonna be a lot of people that are going to still want to do these sort of things because I think social distancing is not going to go away for a while.
Sure. So in theory, like this could be a closing, right? I could have
Absolutely.
the documents sent to me ahead of time. You could be the closer, and I'm signing my stuff, and when I'm done signing it.
And I'm watching you and saying, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, you're signing. And I'll tell you, I had a closing this morning. Hopefully by now it's done, where I went through all the documents last night with the client on the phone because the title company had emailed them to me in the exact order they were going to present them to her today. She was doing a curbside closing. So she drove up, she was signing the documents as we were about to get on this call. So it's been very smooth, a lot smoother than I think a lot of people thought it could be. I don't want to say that it's perfect because that, my job security is that I need to be involved in this because people are not clever enough to figure this out on their own. So
Right. So I want to close with just kind of your general broad sense. We chatted a little bit about this before the call, but in general, things haven't changed drastically. I mean, we are still having closings. We're still funding loans. We're still going through attorney review. Give a, as we close out here, just your overall general sense of the trend and your comfort level with the market.
Sure. I would say, one of the nice things for those of us in this industry is we're basically all essential businesses under the governor's order. So attorneys, realtors, lenders, banks, title companies, home inspectors, movers, everyone falls under an exemption. So from that standpoint, we've been allowed to continue to do business. So as long as you keep selling homes and finding people to buy them, the rest of us along in the food chain are going to be able to continue to do our jobs. Has it changed? Sure. You're doing a lot more of this online. As no one's seeing each other. Inspectors are not necessarily going into homes, or things are done via video. So there's each individual, party to the process has changed the way they're doing business. But I don't know that it has made things impossible. Certainly things are getting done. And I've noticed people are a lot more flexible. I mean, sometimes in a transaction, you have people that are inflexible, and people seem to be a little more flexible now because they realize that, if somebody comes down, the day before closing with, or was exposed to it and has to go into a 14-day quarantine, there's not much we can do about that. And that actually happened a few weeks back. You just have to say to people, look, we're all dealing with it, and, we'll continue to deal with it as long as people are willing to go out and look at places and buy places, there's going to be a process in place for us to finish the deal.
Well, I thank you, first of all, for taking a few minutes today. If anybody has questions out there, either for myself, I know I said we were going to do this live on Facebook, and I've been trying to monitor if anybody has questions, but I don't see any, or if they did come in, I apologize, and we'll get to them. I am available to answer any and all questions that you have regarding anything real estate related. And you can email me or call me or message me. Jonathan is available also. You can find him online. It's Jonathan Aven. John, what's your email? It's Aven at
Jonathan at avenlaw.com. AVENLAW.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, guys. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you for joining, and hope to see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Danny.
Bye-bye.